and welcome back. This is the server and Azure security module of the cybersecurity reference architecture. So let's start with the server side of things. Well, the servers don't typically show up on the perimeter of even an identity perimeter. They are a very core foundational component of a secure strategy. So you want to make sure that you're not dealing with ancient, outdated servers that don't have a lot of features. And then there's also a lot of capabilities that were built into Server 2016 that really help with helping with your security strategy and executing on it and keeping those threats in check as adversaries are navigating the data center and the other components. So the first piece is the privileged identities. And so there's a lot of technologies in there, and several of these are called out in that privilege access roadmap that we mentioned, that really get you to least privilege. And I do truly mean least privilege, and in a much easier way than the traditional, I got to look at every file system access control list kind of way. Just enough admin is the ability through PowerShell to be able to execute things without being an admin. So you can do administrative tasks like apply patches, reboot a server, without actually having to be an admin and all of the risk that it entails to be a full admin. And so very, very powerful capability, and that was debuted around the Server 2016 timeframe, but it's also been backported out through the older operating systems as well. And that's a great, great technology to allow people to do their jobs without having to carry all that extra risk as a full administrator.
And absolutely no reason for you to have admin access forever.
Oh yeah, and that's where just-in-time comes in. And so this is a capability that, in conjunction with our Identity Manager technology, we built capabilities in Active Directory itself so that we can have Kerberos tickets that expire when your privileges are supposed to expire, so you don't have to have these privileges that last longer than the lifetime. So it's a powerful technology, and all these foundational components are built right into the operating system and in Active Directory itself. Credential Guard, Remote Credential Guard, protect the technologies. Credential Guard at a hardware layer, much like in Windows 10. And then the Remote Credential Guard allows you to protect it as it goes over the wire. So essentially, as you go and manage some remote server and you're not sure if it's been compromised, and there's a question over that, but you know you're coming from a trusted admin workstation, that you can administer that machine without actually exposing your credentials to it. You get a full RDP session, all that great experience that you expect as an admin to go and get your job done to manage that server, but you're not exposing your credentials to it that could get stolen if this computer has been compromised. So great technology there. And then there's a theme of hardening the private cloud fabric. So we've got that same device guard technology from Windows 10 that allows you to have that hardware-based integrity of your operating system, as well as which apps can run, which apps and binaries can't. In a server, you generally know which apps are supposed to run, which ones don't, because servers don't have a lot of general purpose apps and users browsing the internet and stuff on it. Control Flow Guard to help with that exploit mitigations. Windows Defender, so antivirus is built into the server and you can turn it off, but it's built in there, it's ready to go, and you don't have to worry about all the integration pain of a third-party antivirus. You can still choose to bring that in, or you can use the built-in one, so it's already there. And then there's a couple of features for really protecting the workloads, and there's a new, if you're familiar with Windows Server, then we had Server Core, which was a subset of that, and we took away the UI and a number of other elements, but it still functioned exactly under the hood for all the networking and services and all those kind of pieces. We've introduced a new variant called Nano Server, which is an extremely small footprint that's even smaller than Server Core. Now you do have to refactor some apps to get them on there, so it's not going to necessarily run every app like Server Core would. But the power of that is it's such a small footprint. It's got such a small attack surface that if you go through that app refactoring, you have these tiny applications and this very small attack surface is very difficult for an attacker to be able to use a common vulnerability to find it.
So really a purpose-built operating system?
Purpose-built apps on top of it, yes, and it's a very, very small, very minimal operating system, yep. So one of the technologies that I really like in the server space that I think is really phenomenal is the shielded VM technology and the host guardian servers that support it. What this does is, when we go into an engagement or when we're helping a customer with hardening their Active Directory and these other high sensitivity workloads, even business sensitive workloads, as soon as you virtualize one of those workloads, you're having to trust and you're creating a dependency for your security on the virtualization. So the admins of it, the virtualization tools, the VM hosts, all of those things you have to then secure at that same sensitive level.
So Mark, what you're saying is when you're talking about running sensitive workloads in a virtualized environment, the attack surface is much bigger. Right?
Exactly.
So we think about access to the disk. I don't have to go and get physical access or admin credentials to go log into that virtualized server and steal information. I can just get access to the data as a Fabric admin. I can perhaps get access to the hypervisor, right?
I can shortcut all of your defenses and come at it from the disk and from the memory level from the VM host. And so we created a technology called shielded VMs that allows you to host those sensitive workloads. And first you want to validate that, you know what, at the hardware integrity level, this is a known good infrastructure. This is something that's been validated at the TPM level before I can even boot up on that.
Yep.
At which point it gets the key, it can boot up, and even while it's running, to make sure that those virtualization admins and the accounts that are the admins, whether it's a malicious insider or an attacker that's stolen their credentials, that they can't get into that sensitive workload. We protect the memory using virtualization technology at the hardware layer, and we protect the disk at the encryption layer using the BitLocker technology. And so it coordinates all of this, and you have these shielded VMs that it's very, very difficult for an attacker to then get into that workload. So it takes that sort of end run or that shortcut into the workload, and then they have to deal with the hardened workload itself. So some great technology that's built into there. Now, I want to talk, before we get into the Azure technology, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between infrastructure on-premise and infrastructure in the cloud, because there's a lot of advantages for securing on-premise because you have full control over the whole stack, and control has been a comforting factor for a lot of security folks.
Obviously, as you're moving to the cloud, you're going to lose much of that control that you had on premises.
Exactly. And so one of the things that we wanted to explain is that it's not an all bad thing. In fact, it's actually probably a lot better than on-premise when you have a trustworthy provider, because it really becomes a partnership. And so when we look at this, you look at your traditional security on the left there, you have a finite amount of resources. Colloquially, you have a 100-gallon problem, and you have 5, 10, and if you're a very rich company with a very large security budget, maybe you have 20 gallons to spend on solving that 100-gallon problem. But the truth is everybody's behind the curve. There's no way that you could possibly secure everything perfectly, especially in that on-premise world. You have a lot of unmet responsibilities. You have a lot of risks you have to accept. And so the first thing that happens when you start moving workloads to the cloud is you start handing some of those responsibilities over. Now, of course, you're losing control with that because you're trusting that they're going to patch and operate your cloud provider is going to patch and operate that infrastructure well. So you have to trust them. It has to be a trustworthy cloud provider. But once you trust them, you have a lot less to do, especially in software as a service, which is kind of pictured on the left there. You only have to manage your users and identities. You only have to manage the configuration of the app itself, and then the way that you access it. So you have a much smaller set of responsibilities. You don't have to worry about patching or updating Office 365 as an example, or Microsoft Dynamics. That's already done for you by the cloud provider. And to a lesser degree, platform as a service, and an even lesser degree, infrastructure as a service. But ultimately, that's stuff you don't have to do. And so you can train your people, you can spend your money, you can get new tools that are focused on these different problems. So you can get more net protection out of your security dollar and your security resources than you could on premises because you don't have as much responsibility. Not as much control, not as much responsibility.
So you're actually enhancing the security posture by moving to the cloud.
Exactly, because there's stuff that you didn't do before that you now have the resources to do.
And at the cloud scale, you're able to do security at the scale of cloud.
Exactly, and that leads into the second point, which is cloud is always connected. In cloud, you don't lose a VM like you could a physical server in your data center. So you have the ability through Azure Security Center to make sure that you have compliance checks across all of it, and there's nothing that gets lost because the agent was off or this or that. If it's on the cloud, it's being managed, and in an Azure infrastructure as a service situation. And then you have Azure Identity Protection where the documents can phone home because there's a cloud service that can always be reached over the internet. And so you get much more protection because of the cloud technology than you could just being purely on-premise and isolated.
And I think we're talking about losing control, but at the same time we are providing the right sort of visibility and traceability
of
what exactly is happening, right?
Exactly, and I don't think of it as losing control as much as, trust but verify with a trusted cloud provider, because you're trusting them to take control of that, and then you're going to validate that they're trustworthy and you keep an eye on them. And so but they're doing it for you.
And that's what comes, it comes back to, again, visibility and traceability. Though somebody else is doing those typical tasks on your behalf,
Yep.
as long as you as a customer are getting the right visibility and traceability back to what is going on,
You're in
that
good
is
shape.
exactly what you need, right?
Yeah, it's what you need versus what you're used to having. And then the last piece is really when you think about threat detection and being able to make those conclusions with machine learning and all those the things that we've discussed earlier, you need the storage that the cloud affords and the ability to scale up and have massive amounts of storage. You need the computing and the ability to run a very compute-intensive job when it needed and then scale back down. So that elasticity of the cloud, all of those benefits of the cloud really help with threat intelligence and threat detection. And of course the community effect, the network effect, where if you have a detection on any one of your peers, you automatically get the benefit of that. So it's a very, very powerful combination, and we really strongly believe that cloud will be more secure. Now, with that said, you still have to take care of your admin credentials. You still have hosts that are exposed to the direct internet with a configuration click, vice having to go change a cable in the server room. There's still some things that you have to get right to make sure that you meet the minimum bar and you don't get any less secure when you go to the cloud. So there's a few hygiene pieces in there, but ultimately, cloud is going to be a much more secure configuration for infrastructure and really for security in general over the long term. So the next piece that I want to highlight here is really kind of our approach and philosophy of how we look at cloud infrastructure and how we enable you to be secure with it. So the first piece is we start with a high security baseline, and this baseline is much higher security than the typical on-premise that we see. Everything from that threat protection I mentioned earlier about Azure Security Center and the hygiene pieces to make sure you got your anti-malware, your configurations, your baseline configurations, your patch levels, all those things, check all of your servers, turn it all on them, and it'll make sure that they're all checking that. So that's an advantage over on-prem. Boom, cloud right away.
And those capabilities are built into the fabric.
Exactly. It's just you just turn it on and the capability is right there. You don't have to install anything or anything like that. DDoS mitigation. When you host on Azure, you're on Microsoft's network. So all the things that we do to protect our own properties, Office 365 and Xbox and all of these capabilities, we protect ourselves against all comers. And you're on that network. You get all those network layer protections. Now, if you have an application level attack, you have to make sure you can scale out versus scale up. There's a few other considerations, but that just comes as part of the platform. You're on our network, you get DDoS, done.
So you're just inheriting all these capabilities which are built into the fabric as you're moving your applications to the cloud.
Exactly. And then we also have ransomware resistant backups. We have encryption at all layers. I mean, you can encrypt 3, 4, 5 times. At the disk, at the VM, at the database, at the cell level. We have encryption all over the place there and anti-malware. And we have a key vault too, because platform as a service, you have to manage a lot of keys, and that's difficult to do securely. It's not something developers naturally do. So we've got a key vault in there to help them with that. So lots of stuff that are just built-in base parts of the platform there. And then the next piece, to go to the theme that you were talking about a lot, is we want to provide familiar capabilities. We don't want this to be a new alien environment. We want to be able to integrate with your SIEM, and we have that in there. We want you to be able to get the security appliances that you're familiar with. If you've got a particular vendor and you're absolutely a fan of them, and this is what your policies and your abilities are built around, great. You can use that. You can get a copy out of the marketplace. And most of those vendors have either a bring your own license or a just purchase it in the marketplace kind of thing. We want it as easy as possible to get those familiar technologies.
And more importantly, we have built these integrations to where you can easily bring your policies from your on-premises environment, apply it, and get it up and running very, very quickly.
Exactly, and that way you don't have to retrain your folks. They already know how to work it. They're familiar with the tools and they're effective and they hit the ground running. And and the last piece is really getting into that same theme that we talked about in the threat detection. Is that broad and deep visibility. We want you to be able to manage this hybrid world because most enterprises, they're not going to be able to turn off all their data centers in the next year or two. And most enterprises aren't going to be able to resist the value of the cloud. So we want you to be able to manage that hybrid piece. And we've built our operations management suite really focused on giving you that consistent on-prem and cloud experience. And of course, Azure Security Center and all the capabilities that are built in at the threat detection level, including some of those advanced pieces.
And really from two angles, right? So when we are talking about Azure Security Center, so earlier we talked about you got to have the right security hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, you have your own ways as an organization to detect that security hygiene on premises. What we are doing with Azure Security Center is providing you with that automated capability to give you visibility into what that security hygiene looks like in your cloud environment. And how do you go about fixing those, right?
Exactly.
So those point-click remediations, if you will, right? Now, once you're there, the second piece is advanced threat detection. So, hey, is your VM compromised, right? Is it talking to a command and control center? Or is there something going on in the memory to where we can take a quick snapshot of that memory, analyze it, and then provide you automated intelligence, back into your SIEM or in the console, which is built into the cloud, which is pretty powerful, right?
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about installing these tools or anything like that. It's just there, you configure it, it's in the cloud, done. And it's an integrated approach. So it's a very powerful piece. And so for the next module, we'll be summarizing up all of the things that we've discussed and close out with a couple of key takeaways. Thank you.
Thank you.